Okay. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you all had a quick coffee as I had. We were running a little bit late with the opening show, so we are trying to catch up and to have some a tight schedule for this session. Really welcome on this, in this session on transnationalism and about transnational social work. Transnational social work is a new field, is a method, is a way of working in which social work really tries to develop their own answers given the fact that more and more people are mobile, that people are living in different places at the same time, that people are in connection with other parts of their families and other parts of the world. I'm really happy that I can introduce to you Mieke Schrooten, who will give a keynote about the effects and how social work can deal with migration, how social work can develop new answers for this grand societal challenge. Mieke will have around 40 minutes for a larger presentation, a keynote presentation. And after that, we're really happy that Eva and Andrew from the Barka organization are willing to present what they are doing in practice, what transnational social work means for them. I'm not going to say too much about it. They will explain their whole way of working. So, Mieke, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Let me first try to get rid of these. Many thanks to the organizers for inviting me to give a talk about transnational social work, as it is a topic that I'm really interested in. I teach about transnational work. I publish quite a lot on transnational work. So I'm very happy to be able to be here today and say a few words on this topic that fascinates me. I'm also very happy that migration is one of the key themes of this conference, besides climate change and digitalization, because I think it's a very relevant topic to discuss at a European conference on social work. When we look at migration, I think there are many different aspects that could be discussed at a European conference. Think, for example, on the large diversity between people who migrate. I think it's very important to be aware of this, the diversity of this group of migrants. Think of their profiles, think of their trajectories, their aspirations. There is also a very political question related to migration, namely who is able to be mobile or immobile, and what does politics have to do with that? There are questions on related to the effect of migration on society, opportunities it brings, challenges it brings. A main question is the role of social work related to all the questions, all the matters that I just talked about. How to relate to cultural differences. There are many potential aspects of migration that could be discussed, and I think many of them are already captured by this concept of transnational social work. Another important thing is who are other actors besides social work organizations who are relevant in this debate on migration. The general question that I want to talk about today is how does migration have an impact on social work, but also the other way around. How can social work have an impact on migration? So that will be one of the key questions. And the picture that I find very powerful to start such a discussion or a talk with is this one. I think it might ring a bell for some of you. This is a picture that was taken in the summer of 2019 when a group of artists and architects installed 3 seesaws in between the metal slats of a border wall between Mexico and the US. And it was installed there following a string of controversies surrounding Trump's commitment to build a wall between the two countries. So what these artist and architect wanted to do was to add to the international debate on borders, which was at that point very strong, as Trump really made it the central point of his political promises to build this wall between the two countries. I chose this picture because it clearly demonstrates how borders still have a very strong impact on everyday life of many people. At the same time, there are also many social processes, many structures crossing borders. And many of the current concerns of social work, including the 3 key topics of this conference, are topics that go beyond the particularity of a nation state. They have an explicit transnational dimension. This is true for migration, but also for the 2 other topics that are central in this conference. And at the same time, more and more people lead transnational lives. So one of the key arguments of transnational social work is that borders on the one hand, but also border-crossing processes on the other hand, pose essential challenges to social work. So because on the one hand, they affect the daily lives of many people, but also of social workers and also of political frameworks. And on the other hand, they also question fundamental concepts and assumptions. And I will come back to that later in my talk. The present attention to borders is actually a counter-narrative to globalization discourses that were very visible at the end of the 1980s and the beginning of the early 1990s, where scientists claimed that there were global flows of people, of goods, of ideas, of money, and so on. There were people saying that the world had become a global village. And some were even claiming that the world was becoming a borderless world, where borders didn't have the same strength anymore as before. And one of the examples that was often given to support this claim was that the power of states was weakening in favor of multinationals. So there was this whole discourse that borders were less important. And that was also the period when the concept of transnationality was raised. Anthropologists, I'm an anthropologist myself, anthropologists at that time made very visible that people who migrated maintained relationships across borders. So whereas up to that moment, many researchers looked at migration as a very uprooting event. A person left his or her home country, went to another country, and that would break all the ties with the country of origin. In the 1990s, there were anthropologists who raised this concept of transnationality, saying that no, this is not the case. Even when people are mobile, they do maintain relationships across borders. It's no coincidence that this happened in a period where this globalization discourse was very active. More recently, there has been quite a lot of critique on this globalization frame, saying that these borders have not disappeared. We have not moved to a borderless world. Quite on the contrary. Borders still do have a very strong impact, be it sometimes under different appearances than before. What's more, there are not only state borders who are relevant, there are also symbolic boundaries between people. And it's not the case that they have diminished. Quite on the contrary. We saw in the keynote earlier in the opening session the difference between deserving and non-deserving or undeserving people. These are symbolic boundaries that are still very strong and powerful today. Especially when you look through the lens of migration, I don't think there will be many people saying that borders don't matter anymore today. There is this connectedness that is very important. I will come back to that as well later. But the impact of the border is still out there. And what's even more, the same border has a different effect, a different impact depending on who wants to cross this border. Some people are highly encouraged to cross borders. Think of students, for example, who are offered many programs to study abroad, to do an internship abroad. Think of expats and so on. Whereas at the same time, other people are strongly discouraged, and there are so many means to try to make sure that they don't have the ability to cross that same border. So borders are out there. They still have an impact, and this impact is very different depending on who wants to cross this border. Without going into detail, I think the discussions on the renewed European Pact on Migration and Asylum are a strong illustration of this differences in borders and how people are treated who want to cross this border. Migration as a topic automatically has a transnational dimension, making it a key example of a topic that is relevant for the perspective of transnational social work. People's migration trajectories are transnational. Migration has a transnational legal dimension that is very important to consider. Migration often leads to transnational family dynamics with people living spread across different places over the world. When I came here yesterday, you can see that I am not very mobile, so I took a taxi here, and I was having a chat with the taxi driver who was, for me, a perfect illustration of what I wanted to say today. He was a 39-year-old man from Afghanistan. He had fled his country already in 2008 because he was a soldier and the Taliban were gaining strength in Afghanistan, so he had to flee. But he left his wife behind, who was pregnant with their child, because it would be too difficult for her to do this, to join him in fleeing, because he didn't know where he was going to, where he would end up, if it would be a safe journey or not. So he had hoped to go to Norway. He ended up in Belgium after having crossed many different countries, spent 4 months in an asylum center, and then he's an exception. He easily found another place to live. But it took him 7 years before his wife and son could come to Belgium. So these transnational family dynamics, he hadn't seen his son being born, and he only met him in person after 7 years. His parents are still living in Afghanistan, so he uses social media to be in touch with them. I asked him, do they want to visit you? And he said they would love to, but they just don't get a visa to come to Belgium from the Belgian authorities. And he said many more things, but I only have 40 minutes. But I think his story and the story of many other people really prove the statement that social workers can no longer pay attention only to relationships, resources, structures, laws, and history in one location and not consider the same in another location. And this is one of the main starting points from transnational social work. What his story of the taxi driver does illustrate was how important this transnational communication is for many people. And also how important transnational networks are and remain for people who move to another country. What I often tell students and when I give a lecture is, it doesn't really matter if a person migrates alone, if a household moves together, a group of people moves together, or people move one after another. These transnational relationships, responsibilities, and ties continue to play a very important role in the life of people. Now, what does social work do with these topics? In general, one can say that despite this relevance of borders, despite the relevance of border crossing developments, in general, compared to many other disciplines, social work is only in its beginnings and systematically reflecting on these border-crossing developments and analyzing them and changing practice to meet these developments. Many researches have been done on this topic, and the most common finding is that transnational perspectives are employed rather sparsely within social work organizations. And if they are, it's often quite irregularly and also often not very explicitly. Which is not that surprising. It may sound weird from a person who focuses on this topic all the time, but if you look at the history of social work, you will see that it is, as we heard in the keynote before, it is often very closely related to the nation state. It was the nation state who developed or officialized, formalized many social work practices, but also policies are often still on a national level or a local level. Concepts are there, problem definitions are often seen or developed on a local level. Methods that are often used, they are most of the time still situated within the context of a nation state, its organizations, its institutions, its legislation, its financial support system, which is one of the reasons why many social work organizations still fall short in examining these transnational processes, but also transnational welfare institutions. Transnational social work criticizes social work for that. It says that the focus on local social work is quite restricted, and that it should have more attention to processes, dynamics, networks across borders, and that there should be this more explicit transnational lens because of what is happening and the topics that social work encounters. So as I said before, many people are leading transnational lives, many topics have a very transnational dimension, so social work should adapt to that and be more transnationally aware, at least. Transnationalism, that is important to remember, is not only about migrants. So even though my story so far has mainly started from the topic of migration, transnational social work also said that people who are very immobile, who are not physically moving across borders, can have a very transnational life, are influenced by transnational processes. So they say that all social workers, not only those who are working with migrants, should have this transnational awareness. And that is a very important key argument from transnational work. They see that within organizations working with migrants, there is a sort of transnational practice, but also other organizations should have this transnational lens because it is omnipresent, the transnational reality. You see here the cover of a book. The book is written by two people who have introduced this notion of transnational social work, and they have given a definition of transnational social work, saying that it is an emerging field of practice that is designed to serve transnational populations, that operates across nation-state boundaries, and that is informed by and addresses complex transnational problems and dilemmas. They also critique earlier concepts that wanted to highlight this transnational aspect of social work. I think we've heard during the keynote that a transnational orientation is nothing new to social work. It has been there from the beginning. But if you look at how this has been operationalized, it has often been a sort of a Western social work teaching those in non-Western countries how to do social work. So it has a very specific understanding of what is good, what is social work, and this understanding was assumed to be universal, whereas it wasn't. And this is also something that transnational social work tries to tackle. It also, another main point of critique is that many social work theories, concepts, don't acknowledge the transnational nature of social reality enough. And, for example, don't look into historical, contemporary dynamics of colonization, neoliberalism, imperialism, and that this should also be part of an analysis that social workers make. One of the main fields in which transnational social work is most developed still is migration, which is not very surprising because it is a very visible transnational process, dynamic. Even though it is not limited to that, it is one of the topics in which this transnational social work framework has been developed further than in others. Transnational social work asks for a paradigm shift. It is not an easy thing that you can just add to what you are already doing. It really asks you to do this, to be open for such a paradigm shift. On a conceptual level, transnationalism makes visible how challenges, this local conceptualization that is still very present in social work is problematic, but also that social work has some internalized assumptions about society and about people. There are many social workers who say that it is important to see the discrepancy between the state-boundedness of social work that is still very present today and the transnational dynamics of the social problems it encounters. And this is really one of the key arguments that always will be repeated when people talk about transnational social work. It also says that social work needs to be unbounded in a way, both related to how they see social issues, but also that they need to be unbounded internally and that they should question this Western dominance that is present in social work. At the level of practice, because it is quite easy to do this conceptual exercise and see certain dynamics, but how should this translate into practice is also a question that is being looked into from this transnational social work practice. And it says that you should have a perspective that recognizes your role as social work beyond a bounded national state. What this means in practice will be something that I explore in the next slides. To see how social work organizations are dealing with the transnational, two colleagues from social work, Erika Richert and Paolo Boccaini, have developed a quite easy and straightforward model, but that is still very useful to look at. So they have developed a scheme that consists of two arrows that are crossing, and one is how transnational aware are organizations. At the top, it is unilocally anchored, saying that there is really a local focus and no attention to this transnational aspect. And at the bottom, it says translocally anchored, which, to make things easy, could be translated as transnationally anchored practices. So the other arrow gives a continuum of how formalized this social practice is. Do we have a very formal organization? Then you are at the right side. Or is this support rather informally structured? And then you are on the left side. And that brings you to 4 different fields. Transnationally anchored practices can be many things. I will give more examples in a minute, but it could be, for example, working across borders with family members of service users who are present in your organization. It could also mean being part of a transnational network of organizations that meet, discuss, try to do political work together, or many other things. Those are just a few examples of what it could mean to be transnationally anchored. There are two short remarks that are important if you look at this model. One is that being transnationally or translocally anchored does not automatically require physical mobility. You can be very transnationally aware, anchored, not even moving outside of your city. There are ways of having this transnational awareness that don't require mobility. And another one is, it is also important to look at the degree of institutionalization if you try to put your own organization somewhere in this scheme. It is not because one of the colleagues in an organization is very convinced of this transnational aspect and includes it in his or her practice that you can say that your organization is transnationally anchored. It should be institutionalized. It should not be occasionally one person or only a few. It should be something that is really part of your DNA of your organization. The fields A and the fields C are often overlooked by social workers because they are not considered social work. These forms of informal social protection could be, for example, a church organizing a kind of support, a citizen initiative, a sports club that has a very strong social component. There is a session this afternoon that goes deeper into this topic of informal social protection. And I think what we can see is that often these informal initiatives have a very strong transnational focus because of what they are, who they are targeting, who they are, the reason why they exist. But I will not go too much into detail about that. So the argument so far is awareness of transnationalism is a prerequisite for social workers to understand important dynamics and inequalities in the lives of people and of communities in a more holistic perspective. This is also important to be able to respond appropriately to transnational challenges in practice, as well as methodologically and theoretically. I want to give a few examples of what this can mean in practice, to have this transnational awareness. First, before I start giving a few examples, I want to say that if you look at least Belgium, you can see that there is a growing awareness of this transnationalism and its importance. It's not that there is nothing that is done from a transnational angle. It is something that is growing. And that is also the reason why I can give a few examples of what transnational awareness means. I would say that especially in those organizations that work with migrants, there are many examples to be given of this transnational awareness. For example, there are social workers who told us during a research that we did a few years ago that they systematically inquire about transnational networks of people they work with. Who is, if you try to make a social map or ecogram or whatever you want to call it, a personal network map, there are many social workers who say automatically, I also ask about important people in their lives who are not physically close to the people they work with. This is a way of recognizing people's transnational embeddedness. It is also recognizing how important the impact of people, but also things that happen in other countries are to beneficiaries residing in Belgium. Sometimes this working with it's not only asking about people's networks, but also actively working with those networks. So sometimes we hear social workers who have WhatsApp meetings with children, family members living abroad, discussing or sometimes explaining what is happening to the person who is living in Belgium, helping them to frame or to assist or to prepare some transnational processes together with those people. Often this is very helpful or considered very helpful for explaining certain things, differences that people encounter. For example, an expectation related to a 13-year-old person living in Belgium that they should work and send money to the family that is confronting the Belgian expectation that a 13-year-old should go to school. So explaining the differences between the countries can also be very important. At the same time, this transnational, there are many more examples that I can give on the micro level, so the direct contact with people, but transnational social work practices do not stop at the micro level. There are many organizations that develop new ways of cooperation and networking, which also means that they broaden their, what we call in Belgium, a sociale kaart, a social map. It means you have an overview of relevant organizations that you work with, can refer people to. They really broaden their social map to a transnational social map, including organizations, be it social work organizations, be it other organizations abroad, in their social map in trying to support the people they work with. It's often also working closely with these organizations, so not only having them in a kind of a map or knowing that they are out there, but also working together on a case base, but sometimes also doing some political work together, exchanging knowledge, expertise, and so on. At the same time, social workers also refer to a number of challenges if they try to do this, if they try to have a transnational component in their work. And one is, for example, some very practical problems. For example, if you work at a public welfare institution that gives, that allows people, or gives people a financial support, sometimes it's very difficult for social workers to deal with information that this money is sent abroad, because this is really conflicting with the idea behind this social support that wants the money to be spent here. So what do you do if you are a social worker and you know that people send money abroad, and because they do so, don't have enough money to pay rent for a decent house, or you know that they eat less, or they don't spend the money the way, well, it is envisioned to be spent by the government. And sometimes this leads social workers not to inquire about transnational networks or to hide the information that they get from colleagues, to avoid that people will be punished for sending this money abroad, or the same, receiving money from their personal networks abroad. So this is a very practical example of how these different ideas conflict or may conflict, and what it means for social workers. So this really forces many social workers into a double position. On the one hand, they try to be show interest, they try to know who they are working with, also this transnational aspect of people. But at the same time, they have to respect rules designed to make optimal use of scarce means available. And this is a very difficult situation. We have heard testimonies of people who try to hide their clients' transnational world from their own colleagues, so as not to jeopardize their clients' eligibility for support. Another thing we also hear from social workers is that They simply do not have the time to look at this transnational aspect of either topics or people they work with because of a very high caseload. And this makes the meetings with people very instrumental and directed to what has to be done here and now. I would like to say more about that, but then I don't come to my conclusion, which is also very important. But also tomorrow there is another session on this transnational social work practices, and it will go much more into detail and discussion on this practical aspect of doing transnational social work. I talked about the micro level, I talked about the meso level. There is also a very important macro level aspect related to this discussion on transnational social work. The transnational lens points to the need to develop transnationally anchored social work practices. It also points to the need to challenge and push national boundaries of social policy. And it also claims that it is very important to do political work on transnational issues. And this adds an extra layer of complexity to this topic of transnational social work, because I think we can think of what we can do on this micro level. I think I hope you get a picture of what the meso level might mean, but these macro level challenges are also very present, and if we do not tackle them, this also has an impact on the meso and the micro level. So how do you realize social justice, empowerment, inclusion, which are very important aspirations for social work, but at this moment, often mainly worked out locally with limited attention to the transnational. I think there are very important exceptions, and there are networks, and there are many examples of what is being done transnationally. But at the same time, this perspective is not consistently used, is not present everywhere, which also weakens the voice of social work around these issues. So transnational social work says that since transnational realities already determine the actual needs in the field, the need to deal with transnational phenomena in social work will only increase in the coming years. And especially from its identity as a human rights profession, there is a need for social work to adapt to this transnational reality. And the political task of social workers would entail to break out of this national container and state power to reflect on the transnational power constellations that shape migration dynamics. Incorporating transnational dynamics into social work practice implies also taking a position in the political boundary work of migration regimes. And that is still another level of challenge than the micro and the meso level, but not one that we can ignore. And so from recognizing transnational dynamics to practicing transnational forms of social work, we still have a long way to go. And therefore, I'm very happy that I could say something about transnational social work here. And as Koen said, I think it was you who said, I hope you will be challenged and reflect a bit further on this topic. I do hope you will be able to do this in the coming days. But before letting you go with my input, I would like to give the floor to Barka. We have two people from Barka here. We had a preparatory meeting about today's session, and when they explained what they do, my impression was that this transnational is something like their natural habitat or something. So this idea and the many levels that I discussed here are present in many of the things they do. So I would first like to give the floor to both of you to say a bit on Barka, and then I have a few questions to them about this transnational social work, and then we would like to open the floor to questions from you. Do you want to sit down or stand up? This is to go to the next.
Is there a microphone there?
Only this
These,
and that, yeah.
Eva, do you want one of those? Is it working? It's on. Okay, let me just figure this out. Okay. Just getting used to the remote control. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to the organisers. Thank you to the professor and all the volunteers working here for inviting us to be with you today. It's a great honour. We're very grateful because we get to have a platform to share with you what we do as Barka organisation, but also it's a chance for us to meet you and find out what you do and network. So it's a great opportunity for us to meet you too. And we're very honoured to be with you. You're doing great work in your own communities. So my name's Andrew. I work with Barka UK, also Barka International, which includes EU countries. And this is Eva, our CEO. Today we're just, can I go back there? Yeah. Today, has anybody heard of Barka before? One. Where's my friend from India? A few people at the back there. Okay, so Barka means boat, lifeboat, barge. I've just got this photograph to basically confuse you. We don't do search and rescue out on the sea, but we do search and rescue on the streets of European capitals with the homeless and citizens of the European Union, but especially Central and Eastern Europe. Today we're going to talk very quickly. We've got a short time to share as much information as possible with you. We're going to talk about Barka Poland, how it started, and Eva's going to share about that amazing story. Barka UK and Barka International, how it grew. Our reconnection service, also known in some countries as a voluntary return scheme or program. Also a little bit about our Ukrainian project, and also about our support to brothers and sisters in Africa, especially in Kenya and the Congo, and Eva will talk about that as well. So Eva, over to you.
Thank you very much, everybody. I am Eva, and I've been involved with Barka community, Barka Foundation since I was six years of age, as my family, my mom and dad, who are psychologists, started Barka in 1989. Yes, the professor here was talking about changes in Europe, Central Eastern Europe at the time, and this was a great breakthrough moment for Poland, for citizens of Poland, because this is when citizens had suddenly the voice to start their own initiatives, grassroots initiatives, which were forbidden under 40 years of communist regime. And my mom and dad, who had worked as psychologists under communism in psychiatric hospitals, prisons, group homes for young adolescents who committed crimes, saw that there was a need to create a community in which vulnerable people with problems, homelessness, mental problems, long-term unemployment, addictions, could find a place of belonging, find a place of support, of brotherhood. And this is how we rented for a very small amount of money a ruined building outside of the city of Poznań in western Poland, and we invited 25 people, men, women and children, well, families as well, 25 altogether. Those were former clients of my parents from the institutions where they had worked. And we started living together and created this community life together. Myself, 6 years old, and my two younger sisters were present as well, and a group of people who came from all walks of life. So I remember very vividly some of the characters. We spent 10 years in this community, and this set the foundation for Barka communities across Poland, but also Barka movement in other countries of Europe. So you see this very much, this time in the community has really shaped my perspective and shaped me as a person. I learned, for instance, that everybody has a potential to change. As long as we create mutual relationships, relationships based on mutuality and trust, not just we distribute a service, provide a service, but we create an environment in which the person feels that they are part, that they are involved, they are part of the solution to improve their situation. So, yes, I could say more about the community, but I think we don't have much time. So, yes, Barka Foundation, through the communities we created, set up also some other projects, but it's important that the communities have, there are about 30 communities in Poland at the moment, all run by individuals who came from the bottom of existence and who have rehabilitated. They are very interesting places, and I warmly invite you to come and visit. They are democratically run, and we also offer support to refugees from Ukraine at the moment, and persons who return with Barka from Western Europe with a failed migration experience. Yes. So we have a whole system of social and professional rehabilitation in Poland, starting with communities. Then the second stage 2 is social and professional integration centers. Those are centers to support individuals who are long-term unemployed and they receive integrational benefits, so a financial incentive to want to keep learning, keep vocationally growing. And there are 250 of those centers in Poland, and we also influenced legislation, Polish legislation, to support long-term unemployed individuals. This is very important because, you know, it's you can give an unemployed person a benefit, a financial benefit, but this is more engaging. Social Integration Center, they also receive benefit, but for accessing, attending classes and workshops and learning through workshops, gardening, carpentry, printing, nail, cosmetics, you know, services for elderly, supporting elderly, catering, and others. So, yes, this is, and the next stage are social enterprises, where individuals learn to set up business plans, and where we prepare local communities, local mayors, local welfare offices, civil society organizations to buy products from those social enterprises, involve those social enterprises in many various ways. Local authorities commission social enterprises to provide services for them in the local communities. So we call this movement of social economy, social market economy. And there are some of the projects that, yes, you can see some of the farms where individuals change their lives and.
Yeah, so thank you. So basically, to summarize as well, Eva's helped set up the first community. Now we have a network in Poland of 30 communities, but we also implemented this social enterprise law, cooperative law, which we imported actually from our friends in Italy, this Social Cooperativa law, and we had to implement that. And now there are about 3,000 of these social enterprises around Poland to try to alleviate poverty, include people who are excluded, people who are just coming out of prison, who are still stigmatized, those who are homeless, to give them a community space, but also a chance to be employed without stigmatization. So Barka was quite instrumental in that whole social enterprise movement. And out of Barka, Poland, the professor earlier on mentioned the banking crisis of 2008, 2007. a lot of the A10 countries, Ascension 10 countries from Central and Eastern Europe, a lot of people migrated to Ireland, to the UK, France, Western Europe. Many people integrated, but a few special cohorts slipped through the cracks and ended up on the streets of London. So London Calling, they phoned Eva and Thomas Sadowska, the founder, along with Barbara Sadowska, the co-founders, to come to London and help us. We have a massive problem on the streets of Fulham, Hammersmith, people in tents from Central and Eastern Europe, can you come and help us? And this is where Barka UK started, and Eva, along with her father and our leaders. A leader is a person who Eva mentioned, somebody who's changed their life around, was living in one of our communities and has a chance to work in the UK or in Barka Island, Barka Netherlands, Barka Belgium as well. So Eva, along with the team of leaders, along with an assistant, working in pairs, doing outreach, working alongside councils, local municipalities, reconnected about 6,000 people. It was a very intense period of time, working not only in Hammersmith and Fulham, but about 14 different boroughs in the Greater London area. And out of Barka UK, then came the other international branches of Barka. Yeah,
so other councils invited us, like for instance here in Belgium, in Antwerp, various councils, local authorities across the Netherlands, in Iceland as well, in Germany, in Ireland, Dublin City Council. And so the leaders, by lived experience, are going on the streets, sharing testimony of their life. So the power of personal testimony is so important. And saying to people on the streets, listen, I have been like you. And look, I've been sober for 5 years. I run my social enterprise. I rebuild a relationship with my family. It's possible for you as well. So this is quite a powerful example of how personal testimony can change people's lives.
And we just wanted to finally say that, you know, reconnection is not deportation. It's not a forced migration. This is a voluntary return for individuals who are really in trouble and have been offered everything, great services like yourselves in other EU countries, but they just can't make it. And there's no shame in that. There's no problem with going home and rebuilding your lives and getting support. And our service has helped many, many people get their lives back on track.
Well, over 35,000 persons have been voluntarily reconnected from various European countries in the last 10 years back to communities of Barka, but not only Barka, other social enterprises, partner organizations across Central Eastern Europe. And also, we don't only support persons with reconnections, but there are many whom we meet who have the potential of staying in the country of host country, and we support them with employment opportunities. So, for instance, in Holland, we have so-called social economy centers. Those are centers supporting Central and Eastern European migrants with gaining and maintaining employment.
Here are just a couple of examples. Janusz, who had an alcohol dependency problem, and we helped him to reconnect with one of our communities. There was a family from Hungary, a grandmother, grandson, and the mother and father. There's Eva with one of our reconnections, Janusz, another Polish gentleman, and also a gentleman who was in the prison system in the UK. He was released with a tag. He was on the beach. He was very suicidal. He heard about Barka. We gave a presentation in one of the prisons, and he phoned us through his probation officer. We work closely with prisons and probation officer systems too. And finally, we also support Ukrainian refugees. Recently, from Barka, Ireland, our operation in Dublin City Council for individual Ukrainians have left a housing scheme that they were part of and were vulnerable, and there was a possibility they might become homeless. So we will help them to be reconnected with their family in Poland.
But also Barka Foundation in Poland have been supporting quite a number of Ukrainian families, especially mothers and children coming to Poland after the war, and those mechanisms of social economy will be very important for countries recovering from war, like Ukraine. So there's already a community patterned after a Barka and Emmaus model set up in Lviv, for persons who are war invalids and who have all sorts of problems. So the model of community is spreading and is very needed across Europe.
And just finally, we're also very much involved with a couple of projects, one in the Congo and one in Kenya as well. And I think we'll leave it there. Thanks for your attention.
Well, I think I will skip my questions to you, but I think the reason why Barka was here was because of this transnational orientation. It started in Poland. They developed a similar way of working in many other countries, but also all these different centers are interconnected. So it means that people can be mobile across various countries, but still encounter the same organization. We've also been discussing political work that you have been doing transnationally. So there are many transnational aspects related to Barka, but just looking at the time, I think it would be wiser to use the time remaining for a few questions from you, and then maybe we can continue the discussion during the lunch break. Are there any questions? And if so, could someone get a microphone up to those people?
Good morning and thank you very much. My name is Clotilde. I work for Eurodiaconia, which is a network of faith-based social and health service providers. My question to you is, do you have policy work to challenge a bit freedom of movement? Because we see the EU freedom of movement as being presented as a very great achievement, but we see that, your work shows that when people are uprooted, sometimes they fall in homelessness because they are disconnected from their traditional networks and all. So do you also have some political work to say, okay, to freedom of movement, but then there is also EU responsibility to care for EU citizens, mobile citizens? Thank you.
Well, you see, we are based in the UK at the moment, and yes, we were, but unfortunately, UK is out of Europe, but we have been involved with political work in the UK. We participate in meetings of working group. This is on supporting migrants, refugees. It's a working group at the House of Lords, and it does have influence on policy creation. We recently worked on a manifesto to support refugees coming on small boats. So we do, in fact, and also Barka in Poland has worked with several governments since 1989, all the governments, in fact, Barka and other organizations, to influence legislation, to support those who are coming from failed migration experience. But it's a great example that civil society has a voice, and all right, this might have been quite a unique situation. Poland was about to join European Union, and we had to update certain policies and increase our standards and create certain policies to even become a member of the EU, and civil society organizations played a great role. But I wanted to say that we have already been invited 5 years ago to North Macedonia to support creation of laws on social enterprises, for example, based on the Polish model. So the law is in the process of being enforced by there's elections now in Macedonia, but hopefully it will be enforced in the next few months.
Thank you for your very interesting practice. I think it's a really transnational practice. And of course, a question that always pops up for these kind of practices which are not always welcomed by local authorities and by national authorities and by European authorities. Then the question is, where do you get the money from? What's your business model? Working in the UK, working in Antwerp, working in all these Dutch cities. Can you say something about it?
The lotto. No. Well, we actually do apply to the lotto for funding, but our main funding comes from, as I mentioned earlier, London invited Eva. They were in a desperate need. There was a need there, and they said, please come, help us. Bring your expertise with you. So a lot of our funding is through council funding, contracts, although I am trying to encourage management to do traditional charity fundraising work as well. So we're looking at different streams from the EU as well.
But also income-generating activities. For instance, in Poland, you see, Barka Foundation also generates their own funding through activities of enterprising activities, providing services to the councils, and the councils financially supports those activities. So, but reconnection service in Western Europe are commissioned by local authorities and ministries as well. For instance, in the Netherlands, 3 national ministries are involved in commissioning Barka. It's our largest operation. There are 55 staff members and 30 volunteers floating around different cities in the Netherlands, and also providing support for those who wish to stay and involve in local labor market.
I will try in English. I had a question. You said earlier, I think, Mieke, it's important as social work to do political work, but I found it challenging in this time because a lot of politics are, extreme rechts. I don't know how you say it in English. Right wing. Yeah. So it's not easy. Can you give us strategies or tips how to do that?
Well, you see, we believe that, in fact, we have seen poverty and problems of migrant workers. The governments, for instance, in Poland, you see, have been changing, but we've seen the problems remaining. So it doesn't really, regardless of the political spectrum, the poverty is there. There might be some improvements, but we have seen, you see, and working with several prime ministers and governments, that, and we tried not to also be, tried to be above the politics, you see. We tried to come with our leaders, for example, who shared their testimonies and show the way that it's possible and how it's possible, and encourage projects like Erasmus, for example, where vulnerable people can travel through and see outside of their home environment other practices, other organizations, study visits, things that build us as a community, as a unity, rather than divide us. I think we have very much succeeded in showing an example, a positive example, as Barka, also to political leaders, showing that vulnerable people can be involved in a local community, that they can be part and can be approached holistically. So the projects, for instance, of ours resemble a life cycle of an individual, from a community where they get support and trust through to education, vocational training, those centers of support to education in Poland. We call it social integration centers. We took from Denmark the good practice which we learned from Grundtvig, folk universities, lifelong learning projects of Denmark. And we incorporated it in Poland, and now there is a law that regulates it. So projects like this, and yes, of course, social enterprises, very much rooted in the community. So very much of a holistic approach to the vulnerable person, and also preparing local community to support such individuals, vulnerable individuals, and support, for instance, social enterprises through engaging them, buying their services. So this kind of example we gave to politicians. And in Poland, 4 legal acts have been created. This was actually more of a left-wing government at that time, with Professor Jerzy Hausner, who was also an economy professor at Krakow University and Deputy Prime Minister of Poland and Minister of Labor. And he worked with his students and introduced the idea of capitalism with a social face, or more of a social economy idea, and the students were interested. He said there is an example in called Barka, and invited people from Barka to share their story, invited my parents as founders to share how a group of passionate individuals started this movement. And he said, this is quite unbelievable, was moved himself, and 3 months later he became Poland's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Labor, and he came to visit us as Prime Minister, saw the project, invited my father to work in his working group, to become involved in his working group on new policies, new legislations, and my father traveled 3 days a week for free to Warsaw from Poznań. It's about 4 hours by car, and came back the same day at night, as we lived very poorly, very modestly. The first community was not supported by the EU, as Poland was not a member of the EU at that time. We lived off the work of our hands, sold our vegetables and fruits in the local market with the group of vulnerable people, and that's how we made living. So my father was very proud that he did it as a concerned citizen, and he did it for free, and that based on those examples of voluntary sector organizations such as Barka, we have wonderful system, legal system in Poland, which is very much active, about active policy measures, about active approach to vulnerable individuals, not so much passive, just distributing benefits, for example.
Sorry, I know the last question was about politics, and I don't want to have to make you repeat yourself, but I'm just curious. You talked about the voluntary return scheme, and you emphasise it's voluntary and it's for situations where it's in people's best interests. Is there a risk of that being co-opted by governments pushing a right-wing agenda? And if so, how do you manage that? How do you make sure that your work is not being co-opted to support kind of broader anti-migration politics?
Yes, that's a very important question. It's a very good question, actually, yes. You see, we have seen, and I myself have done outreach. When we started our project in London, I have done quite a lot of outreach with our leaders by lived experience. And we met people on the streets who, some of them were completely hopeless in the sense that they saw a black hole in front of them, no hope, quite entrenched for many years, drinking hand sanitizers, and they even told us themselves that they wouldn't be able to help themselves, and there were a few cases of people dying on the streets, drinking themselves to death. So I guess that this project of reconnection really targets those who are on the very bottom of human existence. And you see, even I myself engaging in a relationship with such person wouldn't be as convincing to show them this perspective, so they don't just see a black hole in front, but they see a prospect for change. I wasn't able to do so because I don't have that personal experience, but people who do are in great position to appeal to such a person and show a way forward. So you see the 30,000+ people who have been returned have really been saved from, many of them, from death on the streets. So
yeah, just on a point that you were talking about, we're very careful to work closely with our partners in local municipalities and, as Eva mentioned, different governments, and we're also quite aware politically about different things going on in Europe and wider afield as well. So we work closely, for example, with Santa Marta. Also, we've been invited to join their group. It's an initiative to combat human trafficking, which is a massive scourge on our planet. The amount of people being trafficked around the world and awful situations they're in. So we work closely, we keep an eye on the political side of things, but we try to remain apolitical, and we do that through making sure that we're monitoring our reports, our staff, etc., as much as possible, and keeping good, tight, close relationships with local council workers, charities that are going to remain there when the governments change. So, yeah, hope that.
Well, I think we can close the session. I don't know if we are more or less. No, we are quite more or less on time. Thank you very much for joining this session. Thanks a lot for the questions. But most of all, thanks to both of you to testify about the Barka and how you are working in a very transnational way. There is much more to say about what they do. So if you have questions still or want to hear more about this transnational aspect, about the political role, I think you will be around for lunch. So please feel free to ask your questions during the lunch break.
Thank you, Professor, thank you. I just wanted to say that you're very warmly invited to come and visit the projects, both here in Europe, Western Europe, but also in Poland. That's where our network is and the communities are open. Poznań is the headquarters, the city of Poznań. It's easily connected. 35 years of Barka we are celebrating this year, and you are warmly invited to come and visit us and share also your good practice. We would be very interested to learn from you as well, because we believe it is all about mutuality. And we have perhaps something interesting to share, but we're looking forward to learning from you and making projects. We could perhaps apply for a joint project. Absolutely, you're very welcome to come and visit.